I know this ranking's gonna piss off a lot of people. There's no Nolan in my top 10, I've got The Great Escape at number 3, and The Deer Hunter barely made the top 30. So here's my take on the 50 greatest war movies of all time. We Were Soldiers puts Mel Gibson in charge of the 7th Cavalry heading into the Battle of Ia Drang, the first major fight between the US Army and North Vietnamese. The whole thing is basically survival mode. Americans are surrounded, outnumbered, and forced into close-quarters combat in the jungle. Randall Wallace wrote and directed, he's the guy who wrote Braveheart, and honestly, he leans hard into the whole all-American hero vibe. There's a lot of speeches, prayers, and rousing music before anyone even gets to Vietnam. But once the fighting starts, the movie doesn't hold back. The Americans get lured into the hills and ambushed. The battle scenes are long, confusing, and very graphic. True to the real story, you pretty much lose track of who's where in the middle of all the carnage. There's even a moment where the Americans accidentally drops napalm on their own guys, and you get a shot of a screaming soldier cooked alive. It's rough. Hamburger Hill came out in the same 8-month run as Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, but it never got as much attention. It's John Irvin directing, and it's basically the Vietnam War boiled down to its most brutal, hopeless core. The story's about a bunch of young soldiers, grunts, ordered to charge up a muddy hill straight into enemy fire again and again. Sometimes they end up in the line of fire from their own side. It's literally an uphill battle with guys dying left and right. The movie starts with the battalion just hanging out, joking and building friendships. But once they're ordered up the hill, it's just misery. Mud, blood, and bodies everywhere. Hamburger Hill actually goes out of its way to show what it was like for black soldiers in Vietnam, which a lot of other movies totally ignore. There's also the fallout when the troops get home and find out they've become targets for anti-war protesters. It might not be as famous as Platoon, but it's just as honest about what those battles were really like. There really aren't that many solid movies about the war in Afghanistan. Most filmmakers avoid it because it's either too political or just too recent. But Lone Survivor is the exception. This is the one that turns a complicated real-life disaster into a straight-up action movie. It's based on Marcus Luttrell's book. He's the Navy SEAL who actually survived the mission. Mark Wahlberg plays Luttrell, and the film recreates Operation Red Wings, a 4-man SEAL team sent out to capture a Taliban leader. Everything goes wrong. Luttrell's 3 teammates are killed, and then there's a rescue attempt that ends with a helicopter being shot down and 16 more dead. Peter Berg directed, and the movie really goes for it. Some critics hated the heavy pro-war angle, and there's been debate about the details like how many Taliban fighters were actually involved. Doesn't really matter once the bullets start flying. The action is just relentless. When the firefight starts, it's all out, and some of the injuries are honestly tough to watch. The Big Red One is classic Samuel Fuller, and if you know anything about war movies, you know his style. The title comes from the nickname for the 1st Infantry Division. Lee Marvin is the sergeant leading his men across North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, and finally into a concentration camp. The movie's all about the difference between killing in war and murder. That's what Marvin's character keeps drilling into his men. Mark Hamill plays Griff, a sniper who loses his nerve and has to get it back during the D-Day landings. Hamill was still in his Luke Skywalker phase, but he's great here. Especially there's this scene when the unit discovers the concentration camp and Griff has to face what the war really means. There are these moments where it almost feels light, like when the squad stops to deliver a baby in a tank. But the narrator reminds you they don't get medals for that, just for killing the enemy. That's how Fuller keeps things balanced. It's got the attitude of a bunch of scouts, but the reality of war always snaps back in. Warfare is a combat film, but it's not what you expect. It's based on real events from the Second Iraq War, specifically the Battle of Ramadi. You're following a Navy SEAL platoon, Alpha 1, as they take over an Iraqi house to keep tabs on insurgents. What stands out right away is how static it is for a war movie. Most of it plays out inside one house. The tension ramps up when the team tries to medevac a wounded guy, gets hit by an IED, and has to pull back, waiting for support that never seems to come. Joseph Quinn from Stranger Things is here, and his character spends most of the movie with his legs shredded, just howling in pain while the rest of the team scrambles to help him. Alex Garland co-directs alongside Ray Mendoza, who was an actual Navy SEAL and was there in real life. There's almost no Hollywood hero stuff. The movie just puts you in the middle of the unit, makes you feel the confusion and terror, and never lets you out of it. This one's a classic, but it's not your typical war movie. Robin Williams plays Adrian, a real-life DJ who comes to Saigon to work for Armed Forces Radio. He's the funny guy, cracking jokes and playing music, but immediately butts heads with his bosses because he refuses to play it safe. He tells the troops what's really going on. There's not much in the way of action. The biggest moment is a bomb hitting the bar where all the troops hang out. Most of it is Adrian riffing on the mic, talking to soldiers, making them laugh, and teaching English to the locals. But there's this sadness under the surface. You can feel it. Most of these kids he's entertaining aren't making it back home. It's one of those rare movies where you get the laughs, but you also get hit with the reality. Feel good, but only up to a point. Three Kings is David O. Russell's take on the action comedy, set right after the first Gulf War. It's got all that early 2000s style, huge cast, big attitude, and even its own take on bullet-time gunfights. The movie goes inside the body during gunshot wounds just to show you the damage. Clooney leads the way as Major Archie Gates, with Mark Wahlberg, Ice Cube, and Spike Jonze rounding out the team. Pretty much everyone in this movie would go on to headline their own stuff. The plot is pretty simple. Gates and his crew are after stolen Kuwaiti gold, but after running into Saddam's soldiers, the heist turns into something else. Suddenly, they're trying to help a group of anti-Saddam refugees escape into Iran. The movie's actually hilarious in spots, especially Wahlberg, who brings some of that same Lost Kid energy he had in Boogie Nights. But underneath all the comedy, it's about doing the right thing, even when it's not clear what right actually is. Fury is a World War II tank movie from David Ayer. Brad Pitt is Don Collier rolling into Germany with his crew in the last days of the war. The story's told through the eyes of Norman, played by Logan Lerman, who's new to the squad and completely unprepared for what's coming. You get the whole innocent rookie has to toughen up fast arc. Don has zero patience for the SS. He's a pretty violent guy, and the movie makes you feel both the satisfaction and the discomfort of that. There's head-crushing, gut-busting violence, point-blank shootings. In the middle of it all, Norman even has a quick romance with a German girl, only for her to get killed minutes later. The tank crew is rough, nobody's really likable, but by the end, they band together for this final showdown. They pull their damaged tank off the road and lure in an entire SS battalion for a last stand, holding their ground until the end. Fury is intense all the way through. Not a feel-good war movie, just pure, relentless combat. King Rat is set inside Chin Gi Prison, the infamous Japanese camp in Singapore during World War II. George Segal stars as Corporal King, an American who's figured out how to make the best of a bad situation. He's basically working the black market inside the camp. James Fox is Marlowe, an upper-class Brit who teams up with King to pull off all sorts of schemes, like, for example, they're selling rat meat to the other starving prisoners. Meanwhile, Tom Courtenay plays the camp's provost lieutenant. He's obsessed with catching King and Marlowe and ends up driving himself crazy in the process. The movie never goes for cheap gore, but you still feel just how brutal life in that camp is. The men are so beaten down by it all that when a British soldier finally shows up to liberate them, Marlowe actually breaks down. And at the end, when the war is over, King and Marlowe are separated. King just walks away, able to switch off any feelings for his friend, leaving Marlowe alone. There's a real sense of melancholy in that last shot. This is based on a novel by James Clavell, who actually was a prisoner over there himself, so it's a lot more realistic than something like Bridge on the River Kwai. And historians back that up too. It's one of the most historically accurate looks at life inside a Japanese prison camp. Blitz is Steve McQueen's take on the London Blitz, but instead of the usual war movie cliches, he's focused on people you don't usually see in these stories. The main character is George, a 9-year-old mixed-race kid who escapes evacuation and heads back to the East End to find his mom, Rita. You get a real look at what life was like for all sorts of people during the bombing. Rita's factory friends are tough, always ready for a night out and not shy about chasing after soldiers. You meet a Nigerian air raid warden who's based on the real-life man and see the different communities jammed together in underground shelters. It's not just Blitz spirit and everyone coming together, it's not that sort of movie. There's even a couple of thieves played by Stephen Graham and Kathy Burke who pick through the ruins and even rob the dead. What stands out most is just how real it feels. McQueen puts you right there in the rubble, shows what people actually went through. The Cranes Are Flying is a Soviet film about a young couple in Moscow, Boris and Veronica. Everything's great for them until World War II hits and everything changes overnight. One minute they're just hanging out by the river and the next there's a line of tanks rolling by. It's all pretty familiar. Young love, no clue what's coming, and then Boris signs up for the army. Veronica's left behind, not even sure if Boris is alive or dead, and things just fall apart from there. Honestly, it's even rougher for her at home than it is for Boris at the front. She ends up with this guilt, betraying Boris with another man, and then spends the rest of the movie trying to deal with that shame. She works as a nurse, and the movie never lets you forget the pain on both sides, her heartbreak and the wounded soldiers she's patching up. The Cranes Are Flying had a massive influence on Soviet cinema. It's all about patriotism, trauma, and how the war messed people up for good. It's not a simple melodrama either. There's a lot going on under the surface. The movie just feels different from anything Hollywood was putting out at the time. The Guns of Navarone is one of those big ensemble World War II movies, right up there with The Bridge on the River Kwai and The Great Escape. You've got Gregory Peck, David Niven, Anthony Quinn, Stanley Baker, basically everyone you'd want in a war movie. It's set during the Dodecanese campaign, totally fictional, but with a real setup. A team of specialists have to climb the cliffs of Navarone, blow up the massive German guns, and save 1,000 Allied soldiers stuck on a nearby island. Making this thing wasn't easy. The actors got tossed around in a giant water tank thrown into fake storms, total punishment for everyone involved, but it pays off. That last stretch when they're setting the explosives is just straight up tense, and it's one of those finales that actually delivers. But honestly, half the fun is watching all these tough guy characters fall apart and have to work together. Long before Masters of the Air hit streaming, there was 12 O'Clock High with Gregory Peck. This movie gets into the reality of the 8th Air Force during the Second World War, what it actually cost just to survive a bombing run, and what that did to the men flying those missions. The story follows a bomb group with a reputation for bad luck. They're constantly taking heavy losses, and you see the impact, guys coming home traumatized, morale at rock bottom. The higher-ups don't buy into the whole luck thing, so they send in Brigadier General Savage, played by Peck, to whip the group back into shape. Savage isn't the comforting type, though. His approach is to tell these guys the only way to handle the fear is to accept that you're already dead. That doesn't go over well and almost sparks a mutiny. He's stern, arrests, demotes, dresses down anyone not measuring up. But flying too many missions wears Savage down, too. There's not a lot of airborne action until late in the film. It's mostly the drama between the men and the pressure on the ground. It all builds to one simple question: how much can a person actually take before breaking? Now for one of the best seafaring films ever made, Master and Commander. Russell Crowe is Captain Jack Aubrey striding around the deck of the HMS Surprise, leading his crew through the Napoleonic Wars. The story is about chasing a French privateer halfway around the world, but it's really about the day-to-day reality of life on a warship. Rough seas, tight quarters, and the line between pride and duty. Peter Weir directs, adapting Patrick O'Brian's novels, and the movie doesn't waste time, it gets right into action. Cannonballs ripping through the ship, splinters flying, and in the middle of it all is Paul Bettany as the ship's surgeon, dealing with whatever's left after the fighting. There's a scene where he's forced to saw off a cabin boy's arm, and it hits harder than any explosion. This isn't just about defending the captain's ego, there's real soul here, and the final ship battle is one of the best ever put on screen. The Dam Busters is a classic British war movie that actually delivered at the box office. Big hit for its time. It tells the real story of Operation Chastise in 1943, where the Allies used these wild bouncing bombs to blow up German dams. The movie covers pretty much everything. There's a detailed breakdown of how Barnes-Wallis came up with the bomb, and then there's the mission itself, which takes up nearly the last 40 minutes of the film. There's loads of footage of real Lancaster bombers, both in new flying scenes and spliced in from old bomb tests. But it's also very much a product of its time. The pilots are all stiff upper lip, and some of the language definitely hasn't aged well. What stands out here is the movie doesn't end on a high. It cuts to empty chairs and mess rooms for the guys who didn't make it back. It's a real reminder of what those missions cost. Another one that's easy to overlook now is the 49th Parallel. This is from Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, the duo behind a ton of classic British films. It actually won the Oscar for Best Story, but what most people don't realize is it was designed as straight-up propaganda. The British Ministry of Information basically told Powell and Pressburger to make something that would push Americans to join the war. So the plot is pretty simple here, understandably. German U-boat crew ends up stranded in Canada, and suddenly the Nazi threat is right on the American border. That was the pitch. They wanted Americans to see it could happen anywhere. What's surprising is how complicated it gets for a war movie from the 1940s. One of the Nazis, Vogel, played by Niall McGuinness, is oddly sympathetic at times. There's a scene where he gives rosary beads to a poor French Canadian he's just shot, and seconds later he's trashing a picture of King George and stabbing a swastika into the wall. So I gotta say, 49th Parallel isn't just another flag-waving movie, it's got way more going on than you'd expect. If you want a classic, full-scale British war movie, this is the one. The Battle of Britain has Laurence Olivier, Kenneth More, Robert Shaw, Ian McShane, and Michael Caine. Seriously, just the cast alone is worth the watch. Michael Caine doesn't make it to the end, by the way. Guy Hamilton, who did a bunch of Bond films, directed this. It's all about recreating those World War II air battles, and they really went for authenticity. Even the planes are actual war models or almost perfect replicas. You get the posh commanders in the war room, pilots risking everything in the air, a lot of stiff upper lip Britishness, and when the action hits, it's massive. Dogfights, crashes, all done for real, no CGI. For all that, it was a bomb when it came out, which is kind of funny considering it's become a comfort movie for a lot of people now. British, Canadian, Czech, and Polish airmen all get their moment, and it really does justice to the history. Glory is one of the rare war films that actually tells the story of black soldiers in the American Civil War. Matthew Broderick is Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, leading the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, one of the first black regiments in the Union Army. You've got Morgan Freeman, Denzel Washington, and Andre Braugher in the ranks. The main characters are fictional, but the core is real history. The movie picked up 3 Oscars. The Academy loves a war film with a message, and this one really goes for it, sometimes laying it on a little thick, but it works. The big sequence is the 1863 Second Battle of Fort Wagner. That's where Broderick and Washington's characters both die. The whole ending is designed to hit hard, and it does. Glory is all about giving credit to the 200,000 black soldiers who fought in the war, and it's one of the only mainstream films that even tries. Some things are definitely polished up for Hollywood, but when it works, it really works. Where Eagles Dare is one of those action classics that actually lives up to the hype. You get Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood teamed up, sent on a mission behind enemy lines to pull off a rescue. Basically, they have to sneak into a Nazi fortress up in the Bavarian Alps and get an American general out. This is one of those movies where everything is dialed up. You've got cable car fights, secret passages, evil henchmen, and more double crosses than most Bond movies. The violence is a little more brutal than you expect for the era. Eastwood sneaking around, knifing Nazis, and picking them off in the shadows. Right from the start, there's this tension. Something about the mission feels off, and you're never really sure who's working for who. All of that pays off in one of the best reveal scenes you'll ever see. I'm not going to spoil the name just in case, but one of the main characters pulls off a long con, and it's really a masterclass in bluffing and manipulation. The Hurt Locker is Catherine Bigelow's Oscar winner about bomb disposal in Iraq, with Jeremy Renner front and center as Staff Sergeant William James. The thing about this movie is how it puts you right in the action. Every time Renner's out there in that heavy bomb suit, you feel how hot, tense, and claustrophobic it is. The camera's right there with him. The suspense is real and you can actually feel it. Every disposal scene is a countdown, surrounded by people who might or might not be about to blow him up. One of the toughest moments is when Renner's character has to walk away from an innocent man who's been strapped with a suicide vest. He can't help him, and you feel how that eats at him. When James finally gets home, he's completely lost, doesn't know how to function in civilian life. That's the heart of the movie. It's not just about the bombs, it's about the trauma and what gets left behind. The Cruel Sea came out more than 70 years ago, and it's still the best movie about the Battle of the Atlantic, at least from the Allied side. If you want the German submarine story, that's The Boat, but The Cruel Sea is all about what it was like for the crews trying to keep convoys safe crossing the Atlantic. It's based on Nicholas Montserrat's novel and was made by Ealing Studios, the world's oldest film studio. Jack Hawkins plays Lieutenant Commander George Erickson, captain of the HMS Compass Rose, a corvette that spends the war escorting ships through rough seas, enemy attacks, and just constant danger. The crew starts off looking like they're never going to get it together, but over the years they get hardened by battle. They gotta deal with brutal weather, U-boats, and the kind of impossible choices you only see in war. There's a scene where Erickson drops a depth charge even though he knows it'll kill Allied sailors in the water. That's the kind of movie this is. Lots of tension, no easy wins, and the sound design with sonar beeps just makes it more intense. Still holds up. Black Hawk Down is Ridley Scott's take on the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, the mission that turned into a complete disaster for U.S. forces during the Somali Civil War. The whole operation was supposed to take half an hour, grab 2 of the warlord's guys and get out. But it spiraled into a day-long fight in the middle of the city. Hundreds of Somalis were killed, and more than 100 Americans were killed or wounded. 2 Black Hawk helicopters got shot down by RPGs, and that's where the movie gets its name. Ridley Scott's version is full-on Hollywood. There's big cast with more than a dozen of future stars. Young Ewan McGregor, Josh Hartnett, Orlando Bloom are all here. It's brutal, fast, and doesn't let up, but it definitely leans into the American heroism angle and glosses over some of the real context. The movie ends with a big push to safety, which isn't exactly how it went, but it works for what Scott's doing. It's an intense war film. Maybe not 100% accurate, but it captures just how bad that day was. A Bridge Too Far is one of those classic all-star war movies, right in the tradition of The Longest Day. It's a 3-hour epic about Operation Market Garden. This was the massive Allied plan to grab a series of bridges in Nazi-occupied Netherlands back in 1944. The operation's main goal was to secure these bridges and open a way into Germany, but it didn't go as planned. The Battle of Arnhem was supposed to be the turning point, and as the title hints, it really was one bridge too far. The cast is huge. There's Dirk Bogarde, Michael Caine, Gene Hackman, Robert Redford, Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins. The list just keeps going. Richard Attenborough directed, and he didn't hold back on visuals. There are skyfuls of paratroopers, tanks blowing up, and some seriously massive battle scenes on those bridges. The movie covers both the planning and the action, and even though it gives the story a bit more optimism than the real thing, it does a solid job of packing in as much of the true story as possible. The Thin Red Line came out just 5 months after Saving Private Ryan, but it's a totally different take on the Second World War. Instead of going for gritty realism, this one is almost like a poem in movie form. It's about the Battle of Mount Austin in 1942, set on Guadalcanal in the Pacific. But the real focus is what's going on inside the heads of the soldiers. This movie marked Terrence Malick's return to directing after 20 years away. He gets a huge cast. There's Sean Penn, Adrian Brody, Woody Harrelson, George Clooney, and even John Travolta. but most of them are barely in it, more like cameos than leads. There isn't one main character. The movie's full of voiceovers and internal monologues, just haunting questions about war and humanity. It's not really about the battles, but about what war does to people. Malick goes for beautiful shots of the jungle and the ocean, always pulling back from the violence to look at the bigger picture. If you're used to war movies being all action and explosions, this one's the opposite. Definitely not for everyone, but it sure is something. The Deer Hunter is Michael Cimino's big Vietnam epic, the one that won 5 Oscars and basically sits next to any of the all-time classics from the 1970s. Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken play Mike and Nick, 2 best friends who get sent off to Vietnam. There's this infamous Russian roulette scene the Viet Cong forced them to play for their own amusement. The movie caught a lot of heat for that since there's no historical proof that actually happened. But it's one of those scenes that goes straight for the trauma. It's not subtle at all, and that's the point. De Niro's character makes it home but can't fit back into civilian life. So he eventually goes back to Saigon, finds Nick, and they end up playing Russian roulette together one last time. The final moments are brutal, genuinely disturbing. It's like the movie's saying there's no real escape from what Vietnam did to these guys. The whole thing just sits with you after it's over. Gallipoli is another war film that lands completely differently from Hollywood's usual take. This one's from Australia, directed by Peter Weir. It follows Archie and Frank, played by Mark Lee and Mel Gibson, back when Gibson was still in his Mad Max era. Both are competitive sprinters who decide to enlist in the army for the Gallipoli campaign during World War I. The early part of the movie almost feels like a schoolboy adventure, but that doesn't last. They ship out to the Gallipoli Peninsula and get sent straight into the Battle of the Neck. That one was basically a suicide mission, just wave after wave of Australian soldiers getting cut down, while the British officers sit back on the beach with their tea. There's no gore and no shock for shock's sake, but it digs into the fear and the sheer pointlessness of it all. And it all comes down to the last scene. Frank, now a message runner, tries to get orders to stop the charge, but he's not fast enough. He can't save Archie. That's how the movie ends. Hope and Glory is as close as you get to capturing the Blitz spirit on film. John Boorman made it about his own childhood, and it's got all the nostalgia and wonder you'd expect. But it's also just about getting on with it. Classic British understatement. The story kicks off the day Britain declares war on Germany, and what you get is World War II seen as a kind of wild childhood adventure. For Billy, the main kid, London's bombed-out suburbs turn into a playground. Bombing raids, just a fireworks show. When the school gets blown up, the kids cheer like it's the start of summer vacation that never ends. They even gossip about whose mum got killed, like it's just another bit of neighborhood news. Meanwhile, the mums are left at home, keeping things running. Windows get blown out, they just sweep up and put the curtains back. It's all about the attitude, how things keep going no matter what. It's kind of uplifting, honestly. Enemy at the Gates is what happens when you take the scale of Saving Private Ryan and drop it right into Stalingrad. This isn't so much about trauma or the up-close stuff, it's about pure, overwhelming carnage. It's just rubble everywhere, bodies everywhere, violence non-stop. But the real hook here isn't the war itself, it's the sniper duel at the center. Jude Law plays Vasily Zaitsev, a real Russian sniper. Except here he's got a perfect London accent for some reason. His rival is Ed Harris as the top German sniper, who might have been real or might have just been Soviet propaganda. The opening battle is brutal. Zaitsev is thrown into the fight with no weapon, just told to run and survive. But the real movie is the cat and mouse between the two snipers, each trying to outthink the other, waiting for a split second where they can take the shot. The tension in those scenes is real, and the whole thing is built around the idea that either guy could win or die at any moment. It's a war epic, but it's all about the game between these two. If you know anything about memes, you've probably seen the Hitler meltdown from Downfall. That scene's been parodied for everything. But when the film came out, it was actually pretty controversial, because director Oliver Hirschbiegel decided to make Hitler human. Not sympathetic, mind you, just human. And that's the point. downfall is told from the perspective of Hitler's private secretary. Bruno Ganz plays Hitler, and you watch him break down in the bunker as Berlin falls apart. He flips between angry, lost, desperate, and totally pathetic, blaming everyone around him as everything collapses. It's actually pretty chilling, especially the way all his inner circle start plotting taking their own lives or just falling apart around him. Hitler's actual death is quick, undramatic. His body just gets tossed in a ditch and set on fire. The movie never gives you any glory or myth, just the end of everything up close. The Fuhrer has instructed us to kidnap Winston Churchill. So goes the plot of John Sturgis's final film, which sees German paratroopers, disguised as Polish soldiers, infiltrate a Norfolk village in pursuit of Churchill. The plan falls apart in classic movie fashion when one of them gets mangled in a water wheel and his German uniform is exposed. The cast is stacked. You get Robert Duvall in an eye patch, Donald Sutherland playing a sociopathic Irish, Donald Pleasance as Himmler, and Michael Caine as the lead German paratrooper. What makes this one different is you're watching the war from the German side for most of the movie, and Caine's character isn't exactly the villain you expect. At one point, he even tries to save a Jewish woman from the SS. For a war film, it's an odd mix of suspense, action, and that old-fashioned 70s cast chemistry. Tarantino does World War II his way, so you know it's going to be nuts. Inglourious Basterds is a full-on fantasy version of the war, packed with references to old war movies, propaganda, and a lot of film history. Brad Pitt leads the Bastards, an Allied squad running around Nazi-occupied Europe hunting Nazis. But the movie really belongs to Christoph Waltz as Colonel Hans Landa, the Jew hunter. He basically steals the film with every scene, walking the line between campy and terrifying. Tarantino loves to play with language and tension here. There's a scene where Michael Fassbender's character blows his cover just by holding up the wrong number of fingers while ordering drinks, and it all unravels into a shootout. By the end, Tarantino gives you one of the wildest finales ever put on screen. If you've never seen it, this is Tarantino at his most unhinged and most fun. With Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan takes the story of the Dunkirk evacuation and gives it his full-time bending treatment. The film splits into three perspectives, land, sea, and air, and each one runs on its own timeline. So, for the soldiers stuck on the beach, you're watching events play out over a week. The rescue crews at sea, like Mark Rylance's character, experience everything in the space of a day. And then Tom Hardy, flying overhead in his Spitfire, gets just an hour. Most directors would turn this into a confusing mess, but Nolan uses the overlapping time frames to build real tension. The result is a constant countdown, all leading up to one of the most intense and important moments of World War II. Dogfights, ships sinking, chaos on the beach. Everything is designed to make you feel the pressure minute by minute. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is a classic that's easy to overlook, but it's a wild ride through British military history. The movie follows Major General Clive Wynne Candy as he goes from a young Boer war hero to an older, out-of-place officer during World War II. Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger made it as a sharp satire, tried to poke some fun at the old-school attitude in the British military. By the Second World War, Candy just doesn't get the younger generation at all. The movie goes further, showing Wynne Candy's lifelong friendship with a German soldier, a move that really wasn't popular with censors at the time. In fact, Winston Churchill tried to stop the film from being released. Originally, the movie's flashback structure got scrapped, and only years later did it get restored to the way Powell and Pressburger wanted. Now it stands as one of those movies that's not just about the battles, but about how people and entire countries change over time. Tora is one of those epics that's just as much about what happened behind the scenes as what's on the screen. It tells the story of the attack on Pearl Harbor, but it's not just an American perspective. The movie splits its focus, showing things from both the American and Japanese sides. At the time, this was the second most expensive film ever made. It took years to put together and ended up with two directors. Richard Fleischer handled the American scenes, and for the Japanese side, they originally brought in Akira Kurosawa. That didn't last, though. Kurosawa was fired after some pretty wild behavior, like making the crew repaint a set just to get a different shade of white and insisting everyone salute the actors in uniform. After he left, Toshio Masuda and Kinji Fukasaku took over the Japanese sequences. Most of the movie is a slow build. There's lots of officers and officials in briefing rooms, lots of planning, but when the attack finally hits, it's all in. The flying sequences are incredible, with planes that are almost exact replicas of what was really used. The movie sticks closer to historical fact than just about any other war movie out there. Apocalypse Now is Francis Ford Coppola's take on the Vietnam War, and it's a movie that's just as famous for the chaos behind the camera as what you see in front of it. Martin Sheen plays Captain Willard, who gets sent upriver to find and kill Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando. The farther Willard goes, the crazier things get, and by the time you get to Kurtz, you're watching a full psychological breakdown on both sides of the screen. This is the movie with the helicopter attack to Ride of the Valkyries, the napalm strike, and the line everyone knows. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. The stories from the set are legendary. Martin Sheen had a full-on breakdown and even a heart attack during filming. Brando showed up overweight and Coppola had to shoot around him. The whole thing ran months over schedule and millions over budget, but none of that stopped it from becoming a masterpiece of New Hollywood. Most people don't think of Schindler's List as a war film, but if you're talking about movies that deal with humanity in the middle of conflict, it's up there with the best. Spielberg tells the true story of Oskar Schindler, played by Liam Neeson. He's a Nazi party member who ends up saving over 1,000 Jews by bringing them into his factory. At first, it's almost just about paperwork and logistics. Schindler's gaming the system. He's just using his factory as a way to keep people out of the camps. But then you get Ralph Fiennes as the camp commandant. He's one of the most terrifying characters ever put on screen. He's shooting prisoners out of pure boredom with no buildup, just a pull of the trigger and another life gone. What sticks with you isn't the violence itself, but how unremarkable those deaths are. Schindler's List isn't about battles or explosions. It's about a fight for the soul of humanity. One man's attempt to do the right thing in the middle of the worst horrors imaginable. The Dirty Dozen is just classic war movie stuff. Lee Marvin plays the major who gets handed a bunch of soldiers straight out of military prison. These are the guys who'd be lucky to avoid a firing squad anywhere else. Instead, they're put together as a last-ditch team for a dangerous mission. Sneak into a French chateau packed with Nazi officers and wipe out as many as possible right before D-Day. What sets this apart from the usual war movie is that for all the rough humor and wild action, the story doesn't hold back. These are dangerous guys doing an ugly job, and the film actually goes into the mess and moral gray areas that Hollywood usually skips. The mission turns nasty, and you're left watching a team of criminals do some pretty horrific things in the name of war. Lee Marvin is perfect here. Legend has it he spent most of the London shoot drinking and somehow made the character even meaner for it. The Dirty Dozen is rowdy, mean, and still goes harder than half the so-called gritty war movies that came after. This is a Soviet film about a 14-year-old kid who gets dragged into the partisan war in Nazi-occupied Belarus. What he ends up witnessing is a nightmare. This is a movie that really makes you feel the trauma. He comes back to his village and finds it wiped out. Family gone, bodies everywhere. There's a scene where the Nazis force villagers into a barn and burn it to the ground, and it only gets worse from there. Even the partisans aren't spared. When they finally catch the Nazis and collaborators, the revenge is brutal. Burn each other alive, then get shot. The whole film is based on real testimonies, and you can feel it in every frame. The production was an 8-year fight. The Soviet authorities knew exactly how powerful this was going to be and tried to stop it. Director Elem Klimov finally pulled it off, and what you get is something that isn't just watched, it's endured. This isn't war as adventure, it's pure survival and horror. Come and See will wreck you, but if you want to know what it really was like in Nazi-occupied countries back then, this is the one that tells the truth. 1917 is Sam Mendes doing a World War I movie in a way that feels relentless from the first shot. He goes full one-take style, so you follow these two British soldiers across no man's land in real time. George McKay is Schofield, already a Somme veteran, and his buddy Blake is Dean Charles Chapman. They get told to crawl out of the trenches and cross the most dangerous part of the front just to warn another unit about a trap. Along the way, you get a bunch of cameos all popping in for a scene or two. There's Benedict Cumberbatch, Mark Strong, and Colin Firth, to name a few. But the focus is Schofield, this regular guy in hell, and it never lets up. The action is loud and dirty, and there are moments that just choke you out, like bodies floating in the river or baby-faced soldiers bleeding out. It's the kind of movie that's all about what you see and hear, not what gets said. Mendes wanted you to feel the whole thing, and you absolutely do. This is one of those all-time war movies, the kind everyone references even if they've never actually seen it. David Lean directs, and it picked up a stack of Oscars. It's about British prisoners in World War II forced by the Japanese to build a bridge for the Burma Railway. They called it the Death Railway because so many died building it. Alec Guinness plays Colonel Nicholson, the officer who's absolutely obsessed with doing things the proper British way. He won't even lift a finger himself because it wouldn't be proper for an officer. Even when he gets thrown in an iron box, he won't budge. The bridge itself is real. They actually built two in real life, but in the movie it all ends with the big explosion, which didn't happen in reality. But that's Hollywood for you. The bridge on the River Kwai takes some liberties with the facts, but it's still huge and spectacular, and Nicholson's story is just legendary. All Quiet on the Western Front is the classic anti-war movie. Made between the world wars, and that context gives it a ton of weight. It follows a bunch of German schoolboys who sign up for the Imperial Army, totally caught up in the hype. They're full of war enthusiasm, thinking it'll be some kind of adventure, but the movie just tears that idea apart. One by one, every single one of them gets killed. The anti-war message was so strong, Goebbels, one of the top Nazis, actually sent brown shirts to disrupt screenings. And even now, almost 100 years later, it hasn't lost any power. The Netflix remake in 2022 is brutal and graphic, but the original is still gutting. The main character here is Paul Beimer, and there's a scene where he's carrying his friend to safety, only to realize the guy's already dead. Another moment, Paul bayonets a French soldier in no man's land, then has to sit there and watch him die. It's one of those movies that just sticks with you. Grave of the Fireflies is from Studio Ghibli, but it's nothing like the usual Ghibli movies. There are moments of magic, but this is actually one of the most devastating war films ever made, animated or not. The story starts right after Kobe gets firebombed in 1945. It's about a brother and his little sister. They lose their home, their mother is killed in the attack, and their father's off in the Navy, never answers their letters. They get pushed out by their own relatives and end up living in a bomb shelter by the river, stealing just to survive. What really hits is how the film shows everything through a child's eyes. There's a bit of fantasy to it, but it only makes the ending hurt even more. The sense of loss in Grave of the Fireflies hits harder than a lot of live-action war films. As Roger Ebert put it, yes, it's a cartoon and the kids have eyes like saucers, but it belongs on any list of the greatest war films ever made. There's nothing else like it. Platoon is Oliver Stone's semi-autobiographical take on Vietnam, and when it came out, people called it the most realistic Vietnam War movie ever made. It won 4 Oscars and pretty much defined the war film for the next decade. You've definitely seen that shot of Willem Dafoe's character getting gunned down. It's become one of those images everyone recognizes, even if they haven't seen the movie. Charlie Sheen takes the Stone role. He's a privileged kid who signs up, gets shipped to Vietnam, and it doesn't take long before everything around him just collapses. Some of the troops completely lose their humanity out there. The movie doesn't hold back on that. Assault, violence, just people turning into animals. Tom Berenger plays Sergeant Barnes, who basically is the worst of Vietnam in one guy, always on the edge of committing something horrible. Watching it now, almost 40 years later, you can really see the 80s action movie influence. There's this big dramatic score, non-stop quips, and action that keeps ramping up, but the grime and the violence still hit hard. At number 6, I've got Wolfgang Petersen's submarine epic, and it's the exact opposite of most war movies. It's kinda slow and claustrophobic by design. The movie just drops you into life on a German U-boat during World War II. It's mostly boredom, nerves, and waiting, until you get those moments of pure terror like depth charges dropping or spotting an Allied convoy out on the horizon. It's based on Lothar Gunther Buchheim's novel, a fictionalized version of what he saw as a war correspondent on the real U-96. Petersen went all in on technical accuracy. The sets, the sound, every detail about the sub, he wanted it as real as possible. There's some pretty solid action, air attacks, battles, but what really makes the movie work is the way you get to know the crew. Most of these guys aren't Nazis, they're just regular German sailors, stuck together, doing a miserable job and just trying to survive. The Longest Day is still the gold standard for big old-school war movies. It's based on the book by Cornelius Ryan, who was a war correspondent during the Normandy landings. He actually saw D-Day happen from the air. The movie tries to show D-Day as it actually went down, and it holds up as probably the most accurate version on screen. They jump between perspectives, British, American, French, and German, and even brought in directors from each country to handle those scenes. This thing was a monster production, all masterminded by Darryl F. Zanuck. The cast is stacked. There's John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, Richard Burton, Henry Fonda, Sean Connery. The list just keeps going. They take a few creative liberties, but most of what's on screen sticks close to the real events. The Pegasus Bridge sequence is spot on. The movie also leans into some of the classic D-Day myths for the big moments, like the first German sentry who sees the Allied fleet coming out of the mist. Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory is about as anti-war as a film can get. Hollywood studios didn't even want to make it at first, but Kubrick pushed ahead and brought in Kirk Douglas for the lead. Douglas plays Colonel Dax, a French officer defending 3 soldiers set to be executed for cowardice. The whole movie is shot in this stark, commanding style, and the story hits hard. Kubrick's camera work is legendary, especially Douglas's march through the trenches into no man's land. But Douglas is even better off the battlefield. He goes up against the generals, calling them out for using soldiers as cannon fodder. That's where you get lines like, "I pity you," delivered to a general who can't even see what he's done wrong. For a movie from the 1950s, it's surprisingly modern, both in how it looks and in what it's actually saying. And of course, the French hated it so much over its portrayal of the French army, they banned it for 18 years. The Great Escape is one of those movies where even the theme music is famous. If you've never seen it, you've definitely heard the whistling at some point. John Sturges directs, and the whole thing is textbook Hollywood, takes a real story and gives it the big movie treatment. Steve McQueen is front and center as the cooler king, the guy with the motorbike and the attitude, and the movie makes him the star of a huge prisoner's escape from Stalag camp. It's all based on a true story, but the real-life escape was a lot less glamorous and honestly a pretty reckless move. But it doesn't really matter here because the cast is stacked. Richard Attenborough plays the stubborn leader, Donald Pleasance is the forger who's losing his eyesight, and Charles Bronson is the tunnel digger with claustrophobia. The movie just drops classic scenes one after another, like the famous bit where they dump tunnel dirt out of their pants. It's pure heroic movie energy, and it's hard not to get swept up. Zulu is an old-school war epic. Michael Caine and Stanley Baker lead a tiny British garrison, barely 150 men, holding off thousands of Zulu warriors. It's based on the true story of the Battle of Rorke's Drift in 1879, which saw 11 Victoria Crosses handed out. And the movie sticks pretty close to what really happened. Cy Enfield directs, and even 60 years later, Zulu still feels like a classic, all shot the old-fashioned way. Yeah, you can't ignore the fact that it's white British soldiers as the heroes, mowing down waves of black Zulu fighters. That's a little rough when you watch it now, but as a piece of filmmaking, it's impressive. The tension before the attack, the quiet before the Zulus finally rush the mission, and that moment where the Zulus start their war chant, that's as good as it gets for this kind of movie. Pure British imperialist filmmaking with all the good and bad that comes with it. Saving Private Ryan changed everything about how war is shown in movies. Steven Spielberg opened with D-Day, Omaha Beach, and the film actually brought real World War II veterans to tears. Nothing looked like this before. Soldiers vomiting from nerves, blown apart the second they land, total chaos everywhere. From that opening, the whole genre shifted to realism. Suddenly, every war epic had to look and feel like this. After Omaha Beach, Tom Hanks plays Captain Miller. He's leading his squad through Normandy to find Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, whose 3 brothers have already been killed. The mission itself is all about American sentimentality, but it works. The point isn't just action, it's about putting you right in the middle of what combat actually felt like. What sticks with you isn't just the violence, but the noise, the confusion, and how easy it is to get lost in all of it. More than just a classic, it's the best war film ever made. You can rewatch it 100 times and still get something new.